Welcome back everyone, this is part 12 and in this episode we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to be using Lightroom and I'm going to mainly focus in this episode on showing you my workflow for this type of images and this type of assignment, this type of project using Lightroom. Now I'm sure some of you out there are veteran users of Lightroom and you use it every day. You're a photographer perhaps, and some of you I'm sure never use Lightroom, maybe you're not even sure what it does. So I'll give you a brief introduction and then for the rest of the video we're going to focus on some of the things I do in my own workflow. However, I would like to point out a disclaimer here, and that's that the thing you're about to see here is my workflow for this type of images. It is not everything and all about Lightroom, and it's certainly not to say Lightroom is the best way to work, it's the best program or anything like that. It is purely my own personal workflow that I prefer for this type of work and that I would like to share with you. Alright? But like always, it is a workflow, not the workflow. In other words, adapt what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely your own. By the way, my name is Krunoslav Stifter, and if you're watching this on my blog or if you're watching this on YouTube and if you'd like to receive more of these videos, please subscribe, give me a thumbs up, leave some comments, and please share this if you think this is worthy of sharing, because the more people see this, the more I'm gonna be encouraged to do more of these videos. So help me out to keep this series going and to keep new videos coming out. Thank you. Now let's get started. You know, I read somewhere that only about 30% of users of Photoshop are actually photographers. And I presume that means us retouchers as well. Now we kind of assume that, hey, Photoshop is there for us, right? We, the photographers and retouchers. But in fact it's not. It's meant for all kinds of people out there, web and graphic designers and so on and so forth. So at some point, Adobe, the main company that produces all of these programs, started to evolve with their suite of programs: Premiere Pro, After Effects, Dreamweaver, Flash, InDesign, Illustrator, so on and so forth. So they created this one application that bridges the gap between all of these applications. If you have one project, you're working with all of these applications and you have images and graphics that you use on all of these projects, a way to browse that and to use them in each of the applications, you need some kind of a file browser, and that's what Bridge is. It's designed to bridge the gap between all of these applications and just find what you're looking for. But it never really evolved for that, and especially didn't evolve for us, the photographers or retouchers. However, we needed more, right? So they produced another program called Lightroom, and Lightroom was designed for photographers specifically, and the idea is to create a one-stop shop as much as possible for developing your files and allow you to have a database of all of your hundreds and thousands of images, so you can easily catalog them, browse them, develop them, export them, and prepare for whatever kind of output you want. And that's what Lightroom is. But what about us, the retouchers? We're not exactly photographers, but we're not exactly designers either. Well, Bridge seems to work for us pretty well, because if you have only a few images to work with, which many of us do, right, then it's pretty easy to just open up an image. You just browse it, open up a Bridge, you browse your image, you open it up, you develop the file, and that's it. And every time I have only a few images to work with, that's the easiest way to do it. That's why I like Bridge, and I use it quite often for that kind of work. But when you do have more than 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 different images and they all need to be matched and quickly processed, then I prefer to use Lightroom. So that's just my point of view. And what I want to show you is just my way of using Lightroom, like I already mentioned. So let's start, shall we? So when it comes to Lightroom versus Bridge, what is the main difference? How one manages versus the other, all the images? Well, Lightroom is based on the model of catalogs, and Bridge, of course, is a file browser, so you can just browse and open up an image, much like a file browser in Windows, of course Explorer, or Finder on Mac. So let's take a look how does then Lightroom works with images? Okay, so for those of you who've never used catalogs and don't know how it works, a catalog is a database that tracks the location of your photos and information about them. When you edit photos, you rate them, add keywords to them, or do other things to your photographs inside of Lightroom. All of those changes are stored inside of catalogs, but the photos themselves are not touched. And the location of the catalog itself may or may not be where the photographs are. It could be a separate place. Now, another thing to talk about catalogs is that it's a database and it stores records of each of your photos. And there are three key things that it stores. So let's take a look at them. Number one thing that it stores is the reference to where your photos is on your system. Also, instructions for how you want to process your photograph. And thirdly, metadata such as ratings and keywords that you apply to your photos to help you find and organize them. Now, as long as you import your photographs inside of Lightroom, you create a link between the photo itself and the record of the photo within the catalog. Then any work you perform to the photo, such as adding keywords or moving sliders around, it stores that in the photo record in the catalog as additional metadata. Unless you specify, it's not stored within the image. When you are working inside of Lightroom, your changes are separate of the photo and only visible while you're inside of Lightroom. However, once you're done, once you're finished, all you have to do is export the photos, and Lightroom will then combine the instructions for developing the file and photo itself into a separate copy of the file that is ready to share with others. So that is how Lightroom Catalog works. Alright, let's see how this works in practice now. Now, you have to make a choice whether or not you're going to use one catalog for all of your projects, or you're going to use separate catalogs for each separate project. This is similar to using sessions inside of Capture One if you're used to that. And one catalog for everything is, I think, a good idea if you have a lot of images and you want to have one place where you can easily access all of them, organize them and all that. And like you already know, a Lightroom catalog is independent than the images themselves. So images could be on different hard drives everywhere you want. Now, since I'm not a photographer, I don't work with so many files, then creating a separate catalog for each of my projects is a better approach for me. You're going to have to make a decision, what do you want to use. Now, if you use one catalog and you want to continue using it but you don't know where it is, you can click on the icon here and choose Show Catalog Location. This will go to wherever your catalog is stored. Now, if you want to start a new catalog for your new project, you would go to File, New Catalog, and let's put it where our images are, just so I have everything in one place, similar to sessions in Capture One. Let's call this, something descriptive. And I'll click Save, and it's going to create a new folder here. It's going to reopen Lightroom, because you can have only one Lightroom catalog open at a time. So here we have Editorial Retouch. It created a folder with some files inside. This is not that big. I mean, if I go, I don't know how big this is, but it's not that huge. So just going to store previews and stuff inside. Now I have here some images that I want to import, so I'm going to select the ones that I want, and probably one of the easiest ways to, where if I know where they are, just to kind of drag and drop them into the library place here in the center. When I release, it's going to open up the import dialog box and allow me to import the images. Now all the things I want to do here is I just want to add the images. I can also copy them and everything, but I just want to add them and build previews, one-on-one previews. And I'm going to click Import. This will not only import the images, but also build one-on-one previews. So when I zoom image to 100%, it's going to look fully rendered. I don't have to worry about that. Now once Lightroom imports the images, I'll let it first import, and then we can start working on them. Once this is done, I'm going to click on Develop Module here, and we could in fact start working on the images. Now on the left we have one panel which we have our navigator, presets, snapshots and all that, similar to what we get from Camera Raw. Difference is that we have history. And this is what I really like, because unlike history inside of Photoshop, it's unlimited. So anything you want, you can always go back easily. Second thing is that on the right here, we have very similar set of tools and everything like we have in Camera Raw. In fact, the engines are identical. The only thing that's different is the way the interface looks. In fact, if I go to Help, and if I go to About Adobe Photoshop, Lightroom, here I can see that I have a version 5.6 for Lightroom, and Camera Raw is 8.6. But what is really important here is that they exactly are the same in terms of functionality and everything. The difference is that, at the end I can see that 8.6 and 5.6, they are exactly the same. They just started from different numbers. So that means that anything that I edit inside of Camera Raw, I can edit here as well. And that allows me to, just like I did before, to prepare the raw files for Photoshop. And then we can start working inside of Photoshop, and then we can bring the files back inside of Lightroom. And that's precisely the main benefit of Lightroom that I think has over Camera Raw for my particular workflow, is that I can continue working on the layered files while they're no longer Camera Raw. They become layered files, and I can still continue working within Lightroom. That's, to me, a very big advantage. So let me show you how you would now prepare files for opening them up and preparing for Photoshop. So once I'm satisfied with all the stuff that I've done to the image, here on the right with all the different settings, this is the same as I would work inside of Camera Raw. Now once I'm done with what I wanted to do with the image, now it's time to open it up inside of Photoshop. Now before we do that, there are certain things we need to take into account, and that is how we're going to open it up inside of Photoshop. Now if I go for a moment inside our images here, inside of a bridge, and I click open in Camera Raw, just like we did before, right? You remember these options here that says, what our workflow options will be. And the same thing we did here to prepare the files for Photoshop is exactly what we can do inside of Lightroom, but it's slightly different. Let me show you. So in Lightroom, where you would do that is you would go to Edit, and then you would go to Preferences, and here you would choose External Editing, and here now you can choose different options. You can even choose different external editors and so on and so forth. The ones that are most important here are Edit in Adobe Photoshop. Now you can choose, of course, file format here between TIFF and PSD. We're going to choose TIFF. Now here between color space, we can choose only 3 options. Unfortunately, we can't choose more than 3 options. So the option to work with ECI is not available here. And then the next best thing here is Adobe RGB. 16 or 8-bit. I already explained why I use 8-bit for this, so I'm going to choose 8-bit. Resolution, we can set that to 300, and compression for layers, I'm going to use zip here. That will be fine. You can also have here file handling and stuff, but we're not going to deal with that right now. So these are the settings that I would use for preparing my files and how they will be opened up inside of Photoshop. And I'm going to click OK. Now once I'm done editing my file here, right, I'm ready to open it up inside of Photoshop. So what I would do is I would click Edit, Edit In, and here I can choose between different options. Now I can choose Edit inside of Photoshop, and if I click that, it's going to open up a file inside of Photoshop. However, there is, of course, it's going to ask me, do I want to keep the embedded profile? Yes, I do. And it just opened it inside of Photoshop. Now, this is an interesting point. At this stage, first of all, unlike before, I'm not opened up as a smart object. Second thing that you can see here is that down here at the bottom, let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see better. So down here in my film strip where I can see all the images, right now I have only the raw files. I have no TIFF or PSD files or anything, right? I have only the raw files. So unless I save this file, which is now open inside of Photoshop, nothing will happen it almost like it didn't exist. It's opened up only temporarily in memory, but it's not saved nowhere on the hard drive. And if I click cancel, it's going to ask me, do I want to save? In this case, I don't want to, because I want to show you another way to open up a file. And if I go back to my Lightroom, I can see that nothing has changed. But instead of opening it, if I right click and click edit in, instead of opening it like this, I'm gonna click open as a smart object in Photoshop. And when I do, it's gonna do the same thing like it did before, but with one exception, of course, and that is it's going to open it up as a smart object. And this is how I like to work. So in fact, now at this stage, I'm gonna click close, or I can just click File and Save. When I do, it's going to save it. You can see that it's saving. Now once it's saved, if I go back to Lightroom, you can see that it's going to appear here in my film strip. And this time it's going to open up as a TIFF. So now I have a TIFF, and I can see by the name that it says TIFF, and I have my RAW file. So this is a TIFF now, which at the same time is opened up inside of Photoshop here. But within that, we open that up as a smart object. So in fact, now I can have this version of the image, and I can create another RAW conversion. I can right click on this and choose new smart object via copy, and I can double click on the copy of that smart object, make a change here. This time it's opened up inside of Camera Raw, and click OK. It's going to re-render that smart object. And again, we have our two separate RAW conversions. And from now on, anything that I do is exactly the same as I would in the previous workflow that I showed you using Camera Raw. But there is another way in which you can create multiple RAW versions for various purposes, and that is using so-called virtual copies, which is similar to variants inside of Capture One. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to go back to Lightroom, and let's say if I click on the actual RAW file, right, I can see that it's a RAW file here. Now let's say I wanted to create multiple versions of this, but within Lightroom, not with Camera Raw and Smart Objects. I can right click on this and I can choose Create Virtual Copy. Now virtual copy is created. You can see how it looks. It has this little kind of, you know, twisted page thing going on. So basically what this does is it doesn't duplicate the actual file. All that it does is creates a copy, a virtual copy of the original. It keeps the original file wherever it is on the hard drive, and just inside of catalog it creates a different set of instructions on how this image will look. So if in this image I do the different RAW conversion, now I have two different files, right? And I can click on both of them, and I can click right click and I can choose edit, and now I have different options, and one of them is opened as layers inside of Photoshop. And I can even choose open as smart object inside of Photoshop, but if I click open as smart object inside of Photoshop, it's going to render the file, but it's going to render only the first one, and the second one will be rendered, but it will be rendered in a new document, right? So that's one version you can work if that's how you want to work. Another way you can do this is if you right click on them, go to edit and choose this time open as layers inside of Photoshop, and you can imagine what this will do. If I click on that, it's going to open up as layers inside of Photoshop, but just a stacked version of them too. However, if I do that, I lost. You can see that it created two layers for me, and there are actually two different versions of them. But unlike the one when I'm using Smart Object and manually copying them, this time I just have regular layers and I don't have Smart Objects. So that is why, of all the different options, I prefer to go to Lightroom. Let me delete this virtual copy here. Remove photo. and instead I like to just edit in and choose open a smart object. This will open up inside of Photoshop like we saw at the beginning, and then I would just right click and use smart object via copy, and then that's how I would work. And then from that moment on, it's pretty much the same as if I was using Camera Raw workflow, which I showed you in the previous episodes. And once I'm done, I can now continue working on this file. So let's continue from here. So I would just continue working inside of Photoshop until I'm satisfied with what I've got, and this is the same process as if I were doing it way back, when I was showing you in different episodes what I've done inside of Photoshop. Now once I'm done, of course I would have all my groups with layers and everything I showed you before. So I would just continue saving it, and always every time I save it inside of Lightroom, it would appear right next to our original raw file. Now where this is on my hard drive, you can choose edit, and you can choose actually show in Explorer or show in Finder, and it will be right next to your raw file by default, so one next to another. Okay, so that's how I would actually work combining Photoshop and Lightroom, and up until this point it has been exactly the same as if I were using Camera Raw, but with additional steps, which one could say that using just Camera Raw to find images, open them up, work on them up until this point was better to do in Camera Raw. It's less steps, easier to do, and I would have to agree with that. However, this is now the time after I've done my Photoshop edits where it pays off to work in Lightroom. At least for me it does. So let me show you. Once I'm done with this, I'm gonna just close this and save the file. It's gonna spend a few seconds or more to saving the file because it is a big file. Alright, so the file has been now saved, and if I go back to Lightroom, as before, I had everything with no changes. However, let's say that the client says, or I decide that I might want to change something. Maybe I want a little bit more yellow in the skin, or maybe different blue in the sky. Well, I can go to maybe color here under Lightroom, and I can click maybe on the oranges, which is for the skin, and I can add a bit of yellow here. This will change the yellow in the skin. And for the background, maybe go to blues, add a bit of blues there, or maybe like this, and make it slightly different than it was before. So let me show you. This was before and this is after. Now let's say that's the change I want. It doesn't matter if it, for the purposes of this demonstration, it doesn't matter if it's better or worse or whatever, but let's say that's what I wanted to do. Okay, now it is very easy to apply the same change to another file, such as this one, right? All I have to do is select it and click previous, and it's going to apply the same adjustments. Same thing I can do for this one. It's going to do the same changes. So by having this Lightroom now, it allows me to move back and forth and apply the changes. But all of these files are still layered files. In fact, if I go back to our original one, I'm going to right click, I'm going to choose Edit in and Photoshop, right? But this time it's going to ask me three options. The first option is edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. That would create a copy of the file, apply the adjustments I just made, and open it inside of Photoshop, but not with layers. And then edit a copy would do the same without the adjustments of Photoshop, but edit original is the one that I really want, because it will edit original file with all the layers minus the Lightroom adjustments, which will not be visible inside of actual, of course, Photoshop file, but they will remain within Lightroom, and that's all I care about. So here's I would use edit original, and it will open it up inside of Photoshop. Now give it a second to load because it is a big file. Yes, I want to preserve the embedded profile, and here we have all the adjustments and everything, right? Which is exactly what we want. Now let's say that for the sake of this demonstration, just to show you, I'm going to deactivate crop correction and after crop options, so we can see this strip here. If you remember, we rotated and then we had to adjust for that. But for the sake of demonstrating the difference so you can easily see, I'm going to deactivate this layer. And I'm going to click File, Save. And it's going to save the file. Now it might take a slight more time because it is a big file. Alright, so it has saved the file. Now once the file has been saved, I'm going to go back to Lightroom and it's going to preview that, it's going to render that new preview. As you can see, it has all the changes that we made inside of Photoshop, plus on top of that it has also retained, you can see before and after, it has retained the adjustments we have just made. Now unfortunately, when you make adjustments like this, you're making it on a TIFF file, and TIFF file is pretty much like a JPEG file, which means that yes, you can make the changes and you have the options, but you don't have as much dynamic range and flexibility as you have with a RAW file. But still, it's a pretty good thing if you want to make smaller changes, right? But here's another thing that you can apply here, which I really like. So if I go back to Photoshop now, and I activate our new layer, right? And if I click Save once again, it's going to do exactly the same thing as it did before. It's going to save everything, and it's going to retain the Lightroom adjustments. So this allows me now to go easily between the two applications with all the layers intact, plus the flexibility of using Lightroom on top of everything to adjust for small changes. And that's not all. I can do a lot more than this. I'm going to show you. So once the file has been saved, if I go back to Lightroom, I can re-render the preview really easily, and you can see that it applied that, plus again all the adjustments. So going back and forth is really flexible and easy. But there's more things we can do here, of course. One thing is, what happens if you want to make sure that two files look the same? And you're not sure, you can't just copy stuff, you need to have a manual assessment. Well, what you can do is you can select the two files. I'm going to control select the two files, and I'm going to go to my library. Now here, of course, I have my grid view. Well, the one I really like here is this one, survey mode. When I click survey mode, I can see them side by side. Now this allows me now to change one and leave the other one. So if I select this one and go to develop, I can make a change here. Maybe the blue is a bit too blue, so we'll make it a little bit less blue here, right? And if I go to library, I can, again, just by going back and forth from library to develop module, see that change. Oh, I went too far. Okay, let's go to develop. Let's add more blue. I'll go to library again, and I can see the difference really easily. But wait a minute, what if this one is blue here is a bit too bright? Maybe I want to darken that. I can click on this one, go to develop, and on the blues, reduce the luminance slightly, go to library, and I can immediately see the difference between the two files. So this way I can easily compare the files and make changes without having to open up files like I did before inside of Photoshop and make changes, right? So it is nice if you can get really close inside of Photoshop to make the files look similar, but the final adjustments, the small tweaks and things like that, it's so much easier, at least for me it is, to compare and make the changes within Lightroom. But on top of all of that, of course, let me actually go to open this up, and the other thing that's really nice is that I can now multiply select all three files, for example, right? And I can easily export them. If I click on export, now I can export all files without having to open and save them individually. So if I want to prepare a bunch of files to be displayed on web, well, here's an easy way to do it. I have all the options here, of course, the file naming, the file settings, and image sizing and sharpening if I need to, and metadata and all that stuff. Well, it's so easy now to make some kind of a set of settings that I want and click export. And they will export as many files as you want really quickly, which is a lot faster than opening up each Photoshop file or TIFF file inside of Photoshop and then saving it and resaving it and resizing. This way you can easily export everything you want. On top of that, you can create your own personal presets. So export for email, sure, no problem. If I click on that, all the settings will be adjusted for that email. So if I click export, they're ready to be sent by email to somebody. But wait a minute, maybe I want to make my own preset. Maybe I want to export them as full-size JPEGs. That's fine. I can just click on that preset and export all of the files really easily. So I can go back and forth in this way, right? I can export as many presets as I want really quickly, and you can do multiple exports. You know, you can click on one and you don't have to wait until it's done. You can do another export. And so you can export a bunch of files really easily in various formats, for web, for Facebook, for email, for print, you name it. And it's a lot easier when you're doing with multiple files than when you have to use Photoshop. So those are just two really cool things that I can do, right? One would be the going back and forth with slight adjustments and applying adjustments on top of preserved layered files. Another benefit is that I can easily export multiple files for multiple outputs really easily. And I can do all kinds of other stuff. I'm not even going to go into creating, web galleries and stuff if I want to, depending on who am I showing this to. But it's really, especially if you're if you're a photographer and you're having a lot of images of different kind, there's so many stuff you can do here. And of course, on top of all of that, we can also apply sharpening. So just like we did before, but instead of actually creating another layer inside of Photoshop, we can apply our sharpening here. Right, we can just go to Detail tab and apply sharpening. We can also crop the image here if we wanted to, without having to worry about anything. This will crop. If we don't have to rebuild stuff, cropping here is an option I would do. So all of this now abilities for easy output into multiple places, quick small adjustments, cropping, sharpening, all of that is now super easy and quick at the end, where at the beginning I had to spend a little bit more time setting all of that up, unlike using just a file browser and Bridge. But once I'm done with all my edits, the last part of the workflow is so much easier, more flexible, and better inside of Lightroom. And that's why I like using Lightroom. And now, of course, I'm a retoucher, but if you're a photographer and you have the entire shoot with so many files, and you have also different output settings that you want to choose, you want to make different adjustments, or if you want to do most of your work inside of Camera Raw, then using Lightroom really, it seems like a no-brainer compared to the alternative of using Bridge, right? So it is for that reason that I use Lightroom. That will be my best way of using it, going back and forth, and I showed you how it works, and then using it at the end to export the files, to make these small adjustments and changes, and apply sharpening, apply cropping, and all of that. And for this, I like to use Lightroom. So for example, if I had only one image or two images, Bridge, just going up and opening up an image, doing the adjustments, seems like a good thing to do. If I'm using, need to match the colors and export to multiple locations, and might have changes that come along, maybe an editorial shoot like this one, then I would prefer to use Lightroom. Now remember, we just used 3 images, but the original series had, I think, about 20 or more images, so this becomes that much more useful. And that is why I would use Lightroom instead of Bridge for this type of a project. But as you can see from the previous videos, it is perfectly fine if you don't have Lightroom and if you're using Camera Raw. There's nothing wrong with it. It's very effective. It works. However, this is another alternative. And then in the next episode, I'll show you yet another way to do it, and that will be using Capture One. Now, another thing I just want to mention at the end is that some people did ask me, what about matching the colors using numbers? And my advice is to, once again, train your eyes. Using numbers, it's slower compared to using your eyes. It's less of it's more of a hassle. But at the end of the day, if you can use your eyes, you are an experienced retoucher or a photographer. If you have to use your numbers, you're experienced, more of a technician than you know, a creative professional. And I've seen people use numbers, and you can use numbers, but it's never, I don't know, I just personally believe that using your eyes, it's the best approach, better approach, that is. So that is what I would recommend. Just use your eyes. It will work. And that is what I would suggest. Oh, by the way, I almost forgot. There's one more thing. You can also use Lightroom for soft proofing. And there is one limitation, however. We saw how soft proofing works inside of Photoshop. Here you can in fact use soft proofing inside of Lightroom by clicking on this soft proofing checkbox and look at the image. It did two things. First, when you click on soft proofing, it's gonna give you the color of the paper in the background, and it's going to also sort of not give you immediate preview before and after, but gradually you can see how it has kind of fades away, unlike in Photoshop where it's instant change. So when you have such an instant change, your eye still hasn't adapted, so it seems like a bigger change than it really is. But here they introduce this little cool feature that it just kind of fades away. Now of course you can change the paper white here into many different versions, but when you click paper white, it will actually simulate the white of the paper. In fact, look at this area here. Soft proofing off, soft proofing on. What it did, it changed the settings here. So you can actually now choose a profile and in rendering intent. Now there is one drawback. If I go to other and include, you know, display profiles, here I can choose between different profiles installed on my computer, but unfortunately there is one drawback. You can't simulate CMYK output prepress for printing, you know, for process printing. So the problem with that is that if your output is prepress, you are out of luck. You need to use Photoshop to preview your images. However, if you're using a inkjet printer or some lab where you're sending your images, like maybe we're using, I don't know, Canon or something printer, right? I can in fact use that, and it will simulate it. Now maybe this is not a great option, it really looks horrible, but let's choose Epson here, and as you can see, it will preview. But what I like about it is that it previews it, but it also, if you remember, I can change here paper white and 100% white. 100% white is just digital white, but paper white actually simulates the color of the paper and the entire image. So this was before and this is after. If I were to print on this paper ink combination for the profile, and if I make any changes here to compensate for the fact that it's going to change, right? Let's say I want to add more, undo. Let's say I want to add more blacks here because I want to add more contrast that I'm going to lose when I see the preview of printing. When I do that, it's going to give me a warning. It says, create virtual copy for soft proofing. This allows you to preserve your previous settings and create a new rendition tailored to this color profile. Now I can click undo, make this a proof, and create proof copy. When I create a proof copy, it's going to create another copy of this file. Here it is. And this copy of the file here, if I go out of soft proofing and I compare it to the original, you can see how it's much darker. Well, this is a compensation for the fact that I will be printing on a paper that's going to reduce my dynamic range. And this is one really cool feature that if you're printing this on inkjet printers, it's going to pay off. But if you're, like most of us, going to send this to some magazine or something, then unfortunately soft proofing is not a good option to use in Lightroom. But it is another benefit if you are printing on an inkjet printer or something like that. It really works well inside of Lightroom. And there are other things that for a photographer who has maybe more images, different outputs and stuff like that, Lightroom is definitely a no-brainer compared to Camera Raw and Bridge option. But for us retouchers who are retouching and sending this to maybe a magazine to be printed or something, the benefits that you saw was, at least in my opinion, for my workflow, again, ability to go in the survey mode. Once again, I'm going to select these images and going in survey mode and seeing before and after for each of these images, and easily change some settings here inside of my Lightroom. Maybe add more yellow, add more blue, add this, add that. I can apply sharpening here, I can crop here, I can export easily to multiple. If I go out of survey mode, I can go to export and export this to multiple locations really easily, which is always a good idea. So you can see that Lightroom does offer benefits, but ultimately it's just another way of working. And again, adopt what is useful, reject what is not, and add what is uniquely your own. And I'll see you in the next one when we will be discussing Capture One. Thank you for watching, and if you see any videos that you like on my channel, please give me a thumbs up, click the like button, share it if you like with your friends, spread the word, leave a comment, give me some feedback so I can make better videos. And if you like to receive more videos that I upload and get a up-to-date state on my channel and the tutorials I make, please click on the subscribe button. And here's a really interesting thing I would also recommend. You see this little icon here, this little wheel? If you click on it, there's an option called Send Me Updates, and you click just Save. That way you will get updates to your directly to your inbox in your email, not just on the channel update, and you will never miss a video. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.